Hello and welcome to Let's Create Games Part 4, our first app. This time we will create something really useful, a very simple calculator, and we will see how easy it is to create a web application in the browser with simply editing text files. So let's start. I prepared a document and opened it in Adobe Brackets. Great open source project, by the way, but you can open it in any text editor as long as it supports raw text. At the top, we have the doctype HTML, and the whole code is embraced by the HTML tag. And after the start, we have the header, tagged head. And in this header, we have the title, we have CSS, and of course, we have JavaScript. So CSS and JavaScript is in the header, and HTML is embraced by the body tag, and there's even a little bit of JavaScript over there, which we get rid of in a moment. Into the browser, you see this, and basically we have a title, we have a H1 tag. H stands for header, so that's the biggest header you can have. We have some text enclosed by the paragraph or P tag, and this HTML is styled by the CSS above. So we have a background color, light gray, for the body, so the whole page is light gray in the background. The H1 is the background color, has the background color gray, and the P has the background color white. So that's why we have this grayish appearance in the browser. So there is a little bit of JavaScript which calculates two numbers and puts them into the variable C. And this is written with document write into the page. And that's what gives the 4 over there. So the next thing that we're going to do is we will write a very simple calculator in JavaScript. So for that, we don't need much formatting, so we get rid of the styles of the CSS. Also, we want to have a short page to concentrate on the things that we need right now. So the next thing that we're going to do is we will write a very simple calculator in JavaScript. So for that, we don't need much formatting, so we get rid of the styles of the CSS. Also, we want to have a short page to concentrate on the things that we need right now. So we have a nice blank page, and okay, we want to make a calculator which adds two numbers, so we need two fields to enter the numbers. The tag for that is called input, and we create an input tag type text, which means it accepts text as a value, and we have to close the input tag as always. And when we go and reload the page, we see we have one field over there. Okay, that's nice. Let's just copy and paste this line again. And we have two of them. That's good. Now we need a button. Since HTML5, the latest HTML revision, we have a so-called button tag. And we can use that. So let's create the button. And also close it. So we need to have IDs, as we learned in one of the last tutorials, and we name these input tags with I1 and I2 by giving them an ID equals I1 and 2 subsequently. And we give the button a name too, maybe we need that later. And we can enter a text between the tags, so when we reload, we have a page with two fields and an add button. We can click on the add button, but of course nothing happens. The button doesn't know what to do, and we have no JavaScript that tells the button how to behave. But we can change that with a thing which is called an event handler. Once we click, we create an event, and we can add a function to the button to tell it what happens when we do this click event. To add these event handlers, or this click handler in this case, we add onClick equals, well, something, and the something in there is supposed to be the JavaScript commands that happen once you click the button. So there's a very useful function I'd like to introduce right now. It's called console.log, and let me enter this here and let's see what it does. We enter console log 123, and console is what we saw in another tutorial before. We reload the page and we open the console, which happens to be in the JavaScript, in the browser developer tools. If we open this up, then we see nothing for the moment. But as soon as we click the button, we see 123. That's because we told the console to log 123, which is just a number that gets written there. Another important thing is that if we want to display text on the console, we need to escape it with quotes. That means if we want to have a piece of text in programming language is a string, then we delete this number. We enter single quotes and type the famous sentence "Hello World" in there. And once we reload the page and click the button, we see that "Hello World" gets displayed on the console. So it's important to note that these double quotes embrace this JavaScript in the event handler. So we need a different quoting for the string in the console log. So that's why the double quotes are in the outside, so to speak, and the single quotes are on the inside. So that the JavaScript knows where the string starts and ends respectively. Now we need to write code that does the calculation, and we could write this into this onClick handler like we did with the console log. But let's introduce another concept called function to keep the code separate from the handler, the code that does the calculation. So let's get rid of this part of the code first. And let's introduce a concept called function. The way we do it is we create a function name, do calc, and say this equals the function. And the syntax looks like that. So that's the usual syntax of the function. So we have on one hand the variable doCalc that holds the function. And then we have the normal parentheses. Usually these hold the parameters that we give the function. And then we have the curly brackets. And within the curly brackets, we have the code that is going to be executed once we call this function. So let's add some code. For example, our good old console log, and let's enter a different text into this console log. So once we finish that, we need to exchange the code within the onClick event handler with our newly developed function. So we get rid of console log and add doCalc without any parameters for now. So once we save and switch back to the browser and reload the page, we see, okay, hello, more text, so that worked. So what's the magic here? We have the onClick event handler, we have our function call doCalc, we have our function doCalc, and in this function we have the console log hello, more text. So our doCalc for the moment does not much more than logging to the console and writing this text. But as a matter of fact, we want to do a calculation, so we need some calculation code in our doCalc function. So at first we need the values from the input field. And a very nice thing about the console is that we can use it to directly execute commands. And knowing that there is a command called document get element by ID, I can enter that and see what happens if I give it the name of the ID of one of the input fields. We need I1, for example. So using the console like that gives a lot of ideas about how you can do things. So if we just hit enter on this one, it simply returns the whole element that's attached to this ID. That's good to know, but we do want the content of this element, and that's a thing called value. And if I enter it like that with parentheses, then it's a function, and that's wrong because the value of this property is not a function, but it's a property. So we just enter value, and it gives back the number that I entered in this input field. If I again, you can use the console to evaluate the things that happen there. So if I enter I2, I get subsequently the other number. And if I change this number and call this property again, then the value changes. If I enter B1, nothing happens because B1 doesn't have a value in that sense. So that's the value that we need. So let's copy and paste it into our function. So let's introduce another variable for the first number, and let's call it n1 to keep things short. And then we need to paste this piece of code in there and change the ID. So then let's copy and paste this again. Introduce another number n2 and change the ID. And the last thing we need is some variable for the result. So let's call this thing r to keep things short again. And then let's do the addition. So if we add n1 and n2, then r should hold the result, which should be the sum of these two variables. So we can already enter numbers and we can press add, but first we have still the hello more text over there, and second we don't have something that outputs r. So let's just move this line over there and let's log r. Okay, then we reload, and okay, if we don't enter numbers, probably the result will be nothing. So let's enter some real values. And you see, yes, in a way we have the sum, but we don't have the sum of the numbers, we have the sum of the text strings. So what happens here is that JavaScript is a so-called typeless programming language. It doesn't know that we want to add numbers because the text fields can hold both numbers and text. So we have to enforce that JavaScript thinks that n1 and n2 are numbers. So to do that, we need a function that's also part of the JavaScript language. And the function that we need is called parseInt. This takes a piece of text and changes it into a number, a so-called integer. An integer is a non-floating number, and I'm going to explain that in a moment. So if we take our variable n1 and we say parseInt n1, then we turn the text string that was n1 into a number that is called n1. You can do these things in JavaScript. So the old n1, the string, gets to be a number n1, an integer number n1. We do the same thing for n2 and reload and then press add again. Sorry, enter values again. And we see that the addition works now with the numbers. But let's say we don't want integer numbers, we want numbers with points too. So if we enter 1.2 and 3.4 and press add, then we get a 4. That's because the parseInt turns the 1.2 or 1.3 in this case into a 1, and the 3.4 into a 3. So the sum of 1 plus 3 is obviously 4. So that's what the parseInt over there does. So we need a different function to turn the text of the point number into a so-called floating number. So as you can see, the console adds the 4s. It knows that there are 3 times 4s just to keep the console log short. It writes it like that. So if we enter something in between and we do the addition again, we see the 4. And if we click again and again and again, it will the console will behave in a way that it just says, okay, there's 4s and 4s and 4s. Okay, so we need a different function for the floating point numbers, and this function is called, not surprisingly, parseFloat. So the only thing we have to do is to change our function parseInt into the parseFloat function, reload, enter the numbers again, press add, and you see 4.6 is the correct sum of these floating point numbers. So that's nice. Now we have the number in the console, but actually we want to have it on our page because we don't want our users to open the developer console to see the result. So we need to add something to our HTML, and we can use the P, for example, if we want to, and we can create another paragraph, and we need to give it an ID again because we need to address it directly. And let's call this R because it holds the result. So once we do that, we need a way to get the result into the paragraph. And one would think that it is something like value or text, but it is not. That's one of the inconsistencies in JavaScript, if you ask me, that you have a whole lot of things that you have to remember. But with Google as a friend, we can add document get element by ID and enter the R, because that's the element that we want to address. And then we need to know that inner HTML is the function we need. And once we know that, we can hand over the value of R to this, by the way, not a function, it's a property. So if we do that, and if we reload here and enter some values, then you see that our paragraph holds the results. So that thing's working too. So to wrap this up, we have an event handler in onClick, and we call it doCalc. Then we introduced the function where we give the code that is to be called in the event handler, and all of this code creates the result and puts this into our HTML page. So if we just to show this, change the @ sign to -sign, and we enter values, then, oops, this is still the sum. So why is that? This is one of the things that happens all of the time, so that's why I left this in here. Again, I tried to sum this up, and nothing happens. So either I didn't reload, but I did, or I didn't save. And yes, I didn't save. So if I reload this page again and type add, we get the difference, not the sum. So actually, we should change the name of the button to minus, but we just want to add for the moment. So I left that in because it's important to get over the frustration that sometimes happens when you change something. It doesn't at all change anything. So it's very probable that you either didn't save or it didn't reload. You see that and you say, okay, that's a lot to remember. I need to remember that we have something like get element by ID. We have something that is called inner HTML, and yes, that's true in a way. But the good news is there are a lot of JavaScript libraries out there that you can just include in your code, and it makes life very easy for you to develop, especially in the game development area. There are very good libraries, and the development in the browser really shines if you use these libraries. But still, we need to know the concepts of that. That's why it's important that we wrote our little calculator here. So thanks for watching these tutorials, and in the next tutorial we will handle graphics in the browser. Thanks for listening, and see you then.